Hello and welcome to the Navel Gaze, a podcast about autosexuality. I am Tolly Botts. This is Aaron Terrell. And today we are joined with Ashley from Down Under for part 2 of our conversation about autoandrophilia, metasexuality, and the phenomenon of AAP and ROGD. So we are here to pick up where we left off and maybe go down some other rabbit holes as well. So welcome back, Ashley. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes,
we
of
wanted
course.
to get into the last time. Last week we didn't quite get into kind of like the crux of what we wanted to get into, which was that whole the yaoi culture and that kind of M/M, man on man, also known as slash, etc. Culture that's really big in the FTM communities. So kind of like the AGPs are into like the lesbian porn or whatever. In a big part of the FTM culture is this male on male erotica, and that's like, I don't know much about like the yaoi stuff, like the anime and all of that stuff, or fugoshi or whatever that is. But yeah, if you're more kind of informed in that whole aspect of the FTM culture. So if you want to kind of give the listeners a primer on that, and then we can kind of try to dig apart, like, what's ROGD, what's AAP, is it all the same thing, etc.
All right. Well, I'm sorry to say that I did not make any notes for this episode, so I'm going in totally like off the cuff, just straight off the dome, but I'll do my best. So, for one thing, I can remember that when we were doing most of our like shipping yaoi fangirl patrol activities, that was before everyone started transitioning. There was like it was we were all just cisgender females doing that, and then we cooled down with the shipping a little bit and switched on to the trans identification. There was still shipping going on. It's not like we completely switched from one to the other. Still shipping in fandoms. We were very much into fandoms for years. Um, well, I can tell you a bit about the pre-transition times. In the
I want to
yaoi
know.
culture.
I want to know what it looked like. Like how sexual are these stories? I'm also kind of curious, as we're trying to sort of disentangle what is sort of internally motivated and what is more socially motivated. I could see how part of this is like if your friends are into this thing, right? Like your friends are watching a TV show and you start watching it, and so I could see how part of this could be social. Did it feel like certain people are kind of way more into it in a certain way? Were there non-gay ships that were going on? Like when did it become exclusively men loving men, and how sexual was it in the process of, like you're saying, before people were identifying as trans and then once people were identifying as trans?
That's a good question. So how much of it was socially motivated, how much was internal, and also like were there non-gay ships going on? Um well, for me personally, I was introduced to shipping by my friends. I never would have thought to do it otherwise. Like I never would have thought to read gay relationships into subtext in media where it wasn't like made explicit. I probably would have been I was a fandom minded person, and I did like to think about, my shows, movies, books, what have you, when I wasn't actively engaging with them, and think about the characters. And sorry, that beeping is distracting me. I'm just gonna try and focus. Try and
You
focus.
got it.
Um
You got this.
Thanks. I would like to think about the characters and compare and categorize them, really, and think about their personalities and how they would interact and the story. And it's hard to explain, but I would not have really thought it would have taken a lot for me to think, wow, these two would be a cute couple and they should fall in love, if no one had told me to think that. I probably would have focused mainly on the relationship that they had, in canon, and not wondered how things would be if that relationship were a different kind of relationship. And also back then I was kind of like, I don't know, for some reason I just thought it was unrealistic to have too many gay couples. Was I right? Was I wrong? Was I politically incorrect? I don't know. I thought it was unrealistic, but still hot. When I was introduced to the idea, and I thought, hey, these two close male friends in this TV show, you can imagine what would happen if they were more than friends. You can imagine them fucking. How about that? I was like, yeah, I love this. So it was prompted externally, but I did take it and run with it. I did find it very juicy.
So this was, you were primarily accessing this material on Tumblr, right? And Tumblr was something you were kind of exposed to through your in-person friend group already, right? So this is, for you, this is like an extension of an existing in real life friendship, correct?
Yeah, well, the start of year 5 was when I met these shipping friends, these online kind of friends. I was quite offline before then. I mean, I was on like virtual pet websites. But I wasn't on any fan fiction websites or watching anime. They introduced me to anime and Hetalia and fan fiction and all that.
Real life friends introduced you to
yes,
this?
Yes. I should clarify. Okay. These weren't just online friends. These were my real friends that I was seeing at school. I met a new group of friends because I had just moved to a new school. For the last 2 years of primary school. And I joined Tumblr probs like halfway through year 6. So I wasn't on Tumblr for that whole time. But Tumblr was certainly a source of like as soon as I joined Tumblr, I was completely hooked on it. I remember like making my account and just discovering the dashboard and reblogging and all of that, and I was like, I'm going to spend my entire life doing this. This is the best thing I've ever discovered. The dopamine rush was enormous.
Yeah.
And you were so year 6 for us Americans over here. What age is that?
You spend most of year 6 being 11.
Okay.
Although, like, most people will turn 12, like, near the end in preparation for year 7. But most people for most of the year are 11 in year 6.
Okay. I guess this might be not worth even responding to so much, but I don't entirely understand why the relationships have to be gay. Like, it would make sense to me for like pre-gay boys or like young gay men to be interested in fantasizing about these male and male relationships with these characters that you're interested in. It makes sense to me for lesbians or bisexual women or whatever to be interested in making those types of relationships with female characters. I remember when I came out, like, I bought this like pin that was like Wonder Woman, and I don't even remember some other like superhero, and they're like supposed to be a couple, and it's like them looking all kind of sexy and lovingly with each other. And so like that makes sense. It doesn't make sense to me why a bunch of like straight
You're
girls,
wondering what? Yeah.
I'm wondering why straight girls are into this gay sex and these gay relationships, gay male relationships,
as opposed to straight relationships.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, right. Like I also understand young girls being infatuated by love stories with a man and a woman. Like that makes sense to me. That resonates with my experience and the experience of friends and stuff. Or having a person of the opposite sex, like, hanging their posters on your bedroom wall. But I don't understand a straight young girl being interested in gay male relationships. And I especially don't understand, and we'll probably get to this, lesbians being interested in gay male relationships. And this is the interesting overlap, is the FTM community seems to be really into this yaoi and gay male stuff. And so do some subset of lesbians, which Aaron and I, of course, think that signifies autoandrophilia being at play. But it really is actually confusing for me why females would spend so much of their like imaginative time thinking about gay men or creating gay men out of non-gay. Like, I don't really understand it. I'm wondering if you could give me some insight into the psychology at all.
Right. Well, I can't speak as a lesbian, but from the straight girl side of things, the appeal, would you say that the appeal of a straight romance story is that there's a female protagonist to identify with and a male love interest to drool over, right?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Right. One to identify with, one to drool over. You get one of each kind of like enjoyable character. A gay love story gives you two hot boys to identify with and drool over. That's double both kinds of enjoyment.
If you're autoandrophilic.
Yeah, I guess so. But when I was like, just if you don't get the love of the gay stories, when I was back then, I completely did not get the appeal of straight love stories. I was like, well, if you're into women, you want lesbian stuff, and if you're into men, you want gay stuff. Who would want to read a straight love story or watch a straight love story except a bisexual with very specific tastes?
Yeah, that's fascinating. And again, that to me, that speaks to the psychology of autoandrophilia. I remember Aaron and I having a conversation once when I was talking about my own autosexuality. And Ashley, I don't know how much you've listened to our earlier episodes where we talked more about this, but I made a comment to the effect of like, when there's me and another woman in bed, like I've got two women in bed, like, you know,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
So
you're
that
autohomosexual, you're AGP.
Right. that's what we said in our first episode. Yeah, so like that makes sense to me because you're autoandrophilic. I still don't understand why straight girls would be into it.
Because they're well, okay. Maybe not. Maybe they're not autoandrophilic. Maybe not every straight girl who's into that gay stuff is autoandrophilic. But surely for a lot of them it's caused by some kind of autoandrophilic streak, right? Even if it's not strong enough to make them transition, they're at least a cross dreamer, right? Well, that was my reasoning back then. I thought I guess I'm sure I've already said this, but I thought all straight women were AAP secretly and just didn't talk about it. And I wondered if that meant that all straight men were AGP secretly and didn't talk about it. I extrapolated AGP from my own experiences before I even heard about it.
Yeah, that's interesting. My wife, I think, did a similar thing too. Like she thought, like, well, I guess just like all lesbians kind of like want to have a penis, right? You know, like it's like this must be what everyone else is feeling, right? And just not really talking about.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you wanted me to get back to what we actually, if you wanted me to get into what we actually did, we watched the show. I'm thinking mainly of Hetalia. We watched the show. We drew the characters like kissing or whatever. We talked about the characters, not even necessarily all in gay ways. We just like talk about, you know, I love this thing about this character, and like we drew fan art and we just admired them. I don't remember us dressing up as them, which is good because, you know, Nazi uniforms sometimes
frowned upon.
Yeah, frowned upon. You wouldn't. Yeah, who would think that wearing a Nazi uniform is frowned upon? I do remember dressing up as Homestuck characters a little later on. I dressed up as Dave, which is the most female thing you can do, and my friend dressed up as John, and we went to an anime convention. Our costumes were very bad, but we had fun.
That's what matters.
Yeah, that's what matters. Also, as a side note, my friends were like, they were at this time in my life, they talked about like, I don't know, being gay is cool, and it's cool if you're like a gay guy in a relationship with another guy, and gay marriage is great, and rainbow flags and stuff. And for me, at least from a sexual standpoint, that wasn't really my jam. I found it hot to imagine these two male characters not being gay, as in like having a gay identity and a history of gay relationships and all that, but as two straight guys who had each made an exception for the other, which is quite unrealistic, but it's hot. It's not supposed to be realistic, it's supposed to be hot. And that was hot to me. Yeah, just putting that out there.
And do you feel like you were unique in that, or did because that actually kind of leads to a question that I had, was like, what do these relationships look like that these young girls are drawing up? Does it seem like what would be like a real gay male relationship? Were they more like what you're saying, where there's sort of these straight men who are only gay for each other? What was the flavor of the fanfic?
I'm trying to think, because I'm not whatever this culture is like now, this straight girls loving gay men culture is like now. I'm not really actively in it. I only know what I remember from like 10 years ago. But if I can remember from then, well, have you heard of the Tumblr sexy man? Like the
No.
onceler?
No.
There's a certain kind of, I don't know, young suit wearing twink with like, who's like mysterious and powerful and dark. Yeah, the Tumblr girlies would go crazy for that kind of character. Although it's kind of hard to pinpoint what will make a sexy man. Like like Sans from Undertale counts, and he's a fucking short fat skeleton wearing a hoodie. You had your sexy man served to you on a pink and silver platter, and you chose the skeleton. And not even the right skeleton. Sorry, bit of a tangent there, but
I think, Tali, what you're kind of getting at is basically, and Helen Joyce talks. She understands this whole fan fiction MLM thing very well, in my perspective anyway. And what she's saying is the appeal of the is these are characters that are essentially written to be attractive young men, but they are written by and for. They're written by teenage girls for a teenage girl audience primarily. And so it's easy for them to kind of self-insert into these characters just because they are kind of like written by teenage girls. And so they're not exactly,
okay.
I don't know.
So like the flavor of these male characters are girls, basically.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Would you agree with that, Ashley?
Yeah, someone more insightful than me, I can't remember who it was, but they said that like the truest expression of a woman's mind and soul is a male character written by a woman.
Fine.
I think that's pretty, there's something to that.
There is, and that kind of makes sense to me, but then I still don't understand why they would make these characters gay. That doesn't make sense to me. Like, why wouldn't you to an autoandrophile, to someone who's into autohomoeroticism? Like, I don't think that is like particularly sexy to the average young straight girl. So I don't understand why these wouldn't just be written as like heartthrobs that these girls are like seeking. Even if it's totally unrealistic, even if it's like written by a woman, it's like not even what a man would really be like. I don't get why they'd be written gay.
So me neither, honestly. But two pretty straight girls can kiss each other for straight men's attention, right? Does every straight man whose eye that catches, are they all AGP?
Right. Yeah. See, this is exactly it. I think so. There's a few reasons why it appeals to just.
I don't know what I'm talking about, by the way.
No, that you raised a good point. You raised a very good point there. Yeah.
I think so there's a few reasons why it appeals. I'm taking a lot from what you just said there, Ashley, and what Helena Kirchner, this detransitioner who is heavy into the whole MLM fan fiction culture as a teenager. And why this is where I kind of get the sticking point that not all of the people who are consuming this media are AAP, because there's a few reasons, and that is that most of the girls, I think, kind of absorbing this content, it's not like explicitly sexual necessarily. It's more just like just romantic. Just like the heartthrobby stuff. It's two cute boys. And a lot of it, because it's based on Fandom, right? So there's already this male character that they are, really have the hots for. And so they're writing stories where he's with another man because then there isn't a female competition. That's what Helena was driving home, is like when the fan fictions that are written where there's a female character, it's like threatening to them. You're not, no.
I don't
Yeah,
buy that at all.
that's a good
I don't
point.
buy
No?
that. I don't buy that at all. No, I mean, again, like I'm willing to concede if that makes some sense to some people, then like maybe that is what's happening. At least for some cohort of these people. But no, that doesn't make any fucking sense to me. There's no woman to compete with because he's not interested in women. Like, wouldn't that kind of?
No, but again, like Ashley said, in most cases, these are written as like he's a straight guy who's made one exception. Right? So, and that's something also that Helen Joyce has spoken about is he's the straight guy who's made this one exception for you, and that's where Helen Joyce is talking about, like, it's the self-insert of like, he's forsaking his whole identity, his whole like history and everything for you. They're self-inserting as the more feminine, the one who's being sought.
Why?
No,
why is it a man? No, it doesn't make sense to me. No,
Yeah,
it seems like that logic seems a little circular. Like there's no woman because it's a man, and it's a man because then there would be no woman. It does. I don't know. I don't want to be like too dismissive, because also the reason that I want to talk about this is because I don't fucking get it at all. I've never been into any of this. I don't know any of the names. I've never seen any of these. Are they shows? Are they just comics? I don't even know what we're talking about, really. So like, so that's important to lead with. But that
Tali,
I don't know.
I wish I had an answer for you.
It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me.
So to answer the thing about like what a fandom could be about anything. It could be like some kids, rebooted 90210 and now they're obsessed with that and they're writing fan fiction about that and drawing comics about that. Or it could be like, anime. It could be like anything. It could be bands. Like there's like on Tumblr, there was this huge fandom community about One Direction. So they've got this boy band and they're writing these fan fictions about different members of the band being in relationships with one another. Like they'll do it with any piece of media, any art form. They just like take it and run with it and like write their own kind of romantic hopes and aspirations into it. Essentially, I don't really understand it, but it's like that's what fandom essentially is that any piece of media that these young people are really excited about, they will write fan fiction around it.
Fair.
Yeah,
and that makes a little more
stories...
sense to me. Sorry, I'll make this quick. Sorry, Ashley, I've totally cut you out of
That's
this
okay. That's okay.
at this point. But in the context of One Direction or something, that this piece of media, this band, they are only men. So if your creative juices are flowing in the context of like being a fan of this group, it makes sense that like there's only men in the picture. You would have to invent women, right? To ship them with like some woman. Doesn't make sense in any context where there are female. I really just don't get it. But Ashley, please come in.
What I was going to say was not going to answer your question. I was just about to say that some stories lend themselves to fandoms more than others. But basically, if you have a story where there's like characters in a setting that seem like they could exist outside the context of the story, then you like put that story aside or just treat it as some kind of suggestion, and you take just the objects, the characters, the stories, and use them as kind of like a non-physical like doll's house. Like the story gives you these dolls to play with in their house, that's the setting, and you like play with them outside of the story. You make up your own stories with them, you make them interact, do whatever, make them kiss. Like, but that doesn't answer your question.
No.
I wish I could, really.
And that makes sense to me too. And again, all the creativity behind all that makes sense. Why they are specifically and consistently making them gay, making straight men gay too. It doesn't make any intuitive sense to me. And I'm more willing to accept that consuming this media does not inherently mean that you're AAP. but it'll be harder to convince me that the people creating this type of content are not, because I just don't understand why the drive to create male homosexual relationships, it really doesn't make sense. It would make sense that that comes up once in a while. So if I'm a super creative person and I'm obsessed with this series and I love all these characters, I'm creating all of these storylines, yes, 2 of them end up being secret gay lovers for each other, like, okay, that would be one of the relationships, like that it's all gay, that we're taking all of these different mediums and choosing the male characters and making them gay. I don't understand.
I mean, I'm obviously happy to see AAP everywhere, right? So I mean, that's like, sure. I'm usually trying not to do that. So I think you're probably right in that yeah, the people who are writing this are more likely to be AAP, but I think there is a portion of just regular straight women who are absorbing this content. I don't know, when Helena described it made sense to me, that whole like feeling threatened by the concept of a female character, whereas you can like play out this whole romance thing, you know, without somebody that you don't feel like in competition with or threatened by, and they're both, you know, you find both of them cute, and again, if it's not being overtly sexual, it's just like this yeah, so much of it is clearly a straight relationship written by a female, but just both of the bodies are, you know, two of the cute boys from whatever piece of media it is. I think the most famous, or the most kind of classic dollhouse, I think that was a good way to put it, Ashley, as a dollhouse, is Harry Potter. The dollhouse that is Harry Potter, let's say, where you've got you know, like the whole Draco and Harry pairing, that ship. I'm sure you know about that one, right? Like that's like the most popular one. And then there's certainly are people who are writing stories where it's like, you know, Harry and Hermione pairing up and stuff like that. But the most popular ones are going to be the like kind of like the pairing that you wouldn't expect, right? The ones that are like they're kind of like this Romeo and Juliet overcoming of like family and history,
because they're these polarized characters, right? They represent sort of good and evil, or they can save each other, they complement each other, right. But that seems more just dramatic effect than homoeroticism. And also now it's interesting that you say, Ashley, that a lot of these are like supposed to be straight men that essentially are making the exception for one another. Because I was thinking how autohomoeroticism shows up, which I think is just sort of under the umbrella of AAP or a manifestation of AAP. But like that's a fascination specifically with gay men, not just men on men. Like they are particularly interested in gay men. And so that seems maybe a little bit different from what's going on here. These are like supposed to be straight men.
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand your question.
Yeah, that's fine. It wasn't a good one. It's okay. It wasn't really a super well, it's totally fine. It wasn't a super well formulated question. Maybe ignore it. Go back into the sort of progression of this. So like what it looked like once your friends were starting to identify as trans. I am curious if there was a certain point where the content that you guys were consuming became more explicitly sexual. Just maybe walk us through it more.
I'll go into that, but can I say 2 things beforehand? Because I just realized that like I still don't have an answer for your question, but I have 2 ideas just to throw them out there. They're both out there, but I'll say them anyway. One is that internalized misogyny can cause something resembling AAP. Like, you know, you don't want to think about women, you don't want to read about them, you don't want to identify with them, you're not like other girls, you're better than them. So you censor the fact that one of the characters is female by just, you know, chopping her hair, giving her a male name and a penis and testes, and that's it. But everything else about her resembles a woman. That's one idea. The other idea is that every straight girl has an AAP streak. I don't know what you think about that. That's like reverting to my 10-year-old conception of the world.
Right.
But yeah, anyway, those were just those two ideas. No better place to throw them out. But
Yeah.
to return to your actual question, about how my friends and I were going along, the timeline of it all, people started coming out as trans, I believe, in like mid to late year 7 and mainly year 8.
I'm listening.
It was a time of wait, where are you going?
He's listening. He just had to step off.
All right. All right. It was a time of like identity upheaval because of course it was. We were teenagers. That's what teenagers do. They overhaul their identities again and again. People went through so many different names. They were changing them all the time. They were fiction kin and they had like a million different kin types. And I had to endure listening to them talk about their kin type, the characters that they kinned in the first person. But yes, it was.
And these were
it was early high school. It was. Oh yeah, we went to an all-girls school,
right?
Okay. Yeah, gender neutral primary school, but all girls high school. And I think honestly, that the fact that it was an all-girls school was part of what allowed us to do that. Because if there were actual boys around, it would have been much harder for us to convince ourselves and anyone else that we were boys, right? The difference would have been too obvious. But if there are no boys around to like fact check us about what a boy even is, our imaginations were able to run wild. Sure, a boy can be like this. Why not?
So, did you always see sort of the otherkin stuff as like silly or unserious in some way, or did it ever appeal to you?
It appealed to me, and I thought it was silly and unserious. Like there were a few characters. I can't even remember all the characters that I thought, maybe I'm like, I'm not kin, but like I'm feeling the same thing that these kinnies are feeling. But like I always thought it was unserious because it's just like it's saying the way I identify with this character is different and more meaningful and special and better than the way anyone who doesn't put the kin label on it does. It's like identifying with a character, but but in a way that doesn't
deeper.
Really,
it's more,
it's like,
right.
No, you don't understand.
Greater access.
I really am this character. I identify with this character way more than you. When there's no way for you to know that. You don't know what other people are going on in their inside their heads. I just thought it was like drawing a distinction when there so obviously wasn't one.
It's fascinating too because these characters are written by humans.
Yeah, and I did find it annoying when they like, I don't know, would talk about it. They would take it seriously and talk about them in the first person. And there was one time when, like, two friends, there was a bit of tension because they both kinned the same Steven Universe character. And I was just like, this is so dumb. But I couldn't say that to them. There was so much I couldn't say back then. It was honest. There was a bit of an authoritarianism to our friend group. There were a lot of words we couldn't say. We couldn't say spooky like for Halloween decorations or anything. I know that Australians celebrate Halloween much anyway, but we couldn't say that things are spooky because that's racist.
So
I swear to God, I'm not making this up.
You had Tumblr around you 24/7.
Yes,
like you.
Even when we went on Tumblr, we were on Tumblr was on us.
Right.
Yeah.
like a mold. We couldn't say spooky, and we couldn't call anything stupid or crazy because that was ableist.
Yeah.
You couldn't disable the settings on your computer because that was ableist too. And this is my personal favorite. Calling something poor quality is classist.
Poor. Okay.
Like, okay, so I want to take a moment to explain what's actually wrong with this situation here, because I don't think our interest in social justice was a bad thing. I think that, like, wanting to make the world a better place for minorities and like just in general, that's not a bad thing. And like many adults have put many hours into studying how that can be done, how this or that group is oppressed, blah blah blah. Like you learn about it in university. Like it's not like we were onto nothing. That wasn't the problem. The interest in social justice. The obsession with with words and with saying like changing the words that we use, that's going to fix every problem in the world. I don't think that was the problem either, because words are important. Language is important. It's not the only important thing, but when you're a high schooler, it's one of the only things that you have control over. We didn't have jobs. We didn't have control over how we spent most of our time. We couldn't vote. We were just kids, and on some level, we knew how powerless we were, and so we were compensating by being like anal about the one thing we could control, which was the words we used. No, the problem was the authoritarian nature of it. When let's call there's one girl who's like the ringleader. Let's call her Stacy. When Stacy said that this word is offensive, so we can't use it anymore, that was the end of the conversation. That should have been the start of a conversation. Like when you're a teenager, you're supposed to be like intellectually curious and exploring different ideas, not like shutting yourself away like that. And the whole thing was just so Mean Girls. It's like on Wednesdays we wear pink. You can't wear a vest or a ponytail 2 days in a row. You can't use this word. You can't use that word. There is no fucking way that would have happened to a group of boys at an all-boys school, which made our trans identification extra ironic. Even Stacy identified as some flavor of not cisgender, and she was the most feminine person I knew, from her dress sense to her bullying tactics.
That makes a lot of sense. Young people who are idealistic and just like inherently not disempowered, just not very powerful. Like you said, you can't even really control what you do with most of your time because you got to go to school. You know, like things are you have very little control. It makes sense that you take control and try to police language, because that is something that you can police your own language, and then you can try to guilt people into policing their own language. I was definitely a language policer for many years, so I cringe at it now, but like I understand that impulse and the self-righteousness that comes with it, and it is based in like wanting to do the right thing and wanting to help people. It's just authoritarian and naive.
I'm not huge on the language policing now, but I still I don't know, I still have my opinions on what words are problematic or inaccurate or wrong or just plain offensive, and like, you know, things that people say. I'm not gonna like try and police them, certainly not online, but like I said, language does matter. It's not like Sorry, what were we saying?
Do any of your friends No, it's okay. Do any of your friends from this era, are any of them still identifying as trans or as otherkin?
I know that multiple of them are not. In fact, they may have done like quite a 180 on the trans identification thing. There are a few that I've lost contact with, and so I don't know if they are still staunchly identifying as trans, or if they've done a 180 and are staunchly in the opposite direction, or if they've just kind of like slowly lapsed. You know, like if you're like a lapsed Catholic or something. I don't know.
Right, but if like your hunch is correct that it was AAP at the root of for all of them, that doesn't just go away, right? So,
well, what if it does?
Well, then Aaron would argue it wasn't AAP.
There's one of them I'm sure has some kind of AAP streak in her, but right now is very much female identified and happy to be a woman.
Is she anti-trans? Did she make the 180 that you were talking about?
I don't know if anti-trans is the right word, but she used to believe some things that she doesn't anymore. Like she was on track to like even go on testosterone at one point, which seems very hard to believe now. But yeah, she was identifying as a gay trans man for a bit. But she's a naturally quite girly person. Like I don't know, and I don't even think she'd find that offensive. I think it's just the truth. She's like,
but as far as you know, she hasn't like become a gender critical activist.
I don't know of any activism in her life, and I also am wary of talking too much about a specific person.
Fair.
Like if I ever bring up any of these people again on this podcast that I've already brought up, I won't necessarily tell you it's the same person from before.
Right.
Just for the sake of like, you know, I don't want to create these character profiles that have these common threads, because each one like compromises, like if one of them gets so detailed that it becomes identifiable, then all of us lose our anonymity, and nobody but me agreed to be on this podcast.
Right. That's fair. That's fair. I asked the question obviously because we're trying to get at what Aaron and I are interested in here is like how can we tell what's going on for this population? I think statistically it's very unlikely that this entire group of friends was autoandrophilic, in the same way that like one of the red flags that brought about research into rapid onset gender dysphoria was the clustering of all of these kids, where it was statistically so unlikely to be impossible, right?
Right.
People like to claim, well, trans people find each other. They found each other in their 5th grade class. Like they didn't even get to choose their class. Like that doesn't really make sense. So I have a really hard time believing that all of these people were autoandrophilic.
Right.
And that's why I asked, how many of them are still identifying as trans. And that's why I asked if any of them went to become gender critical activists, because Aaron and I think that there's some people who are autoandrophilic who lean into some of the gender critical turfy stuff, the radical feminism, as sort of a means of repression. Of course, I don't want to be a man because men are evil. Yeah. And this like what seems like very forced, like I'm going to remove all maleness from my life, in fact, because, men are so bad and women are so vulnerable to these evil men. And so it does come across as a cope.
Yeah, men are evil autistic perverts, unlike me. Definitely none of those things.
No. In this, the gender critical group are talking about, they do the whole wokery thing, where if they're autistic, then they're part of the oppressed group, and so they're not an evil pervert because
but they're autistic in the bad way, the actually autistic way, the antisocial way. They have poor social skills. Right. They're not just like playing with stim toys on TikTok. No, they are socially inept and sexually deviant and just everything wrong with the world, and just cringe. They're cringe. Males are cringe. I, on the other hand, am a paragon of uncringiness. Mm-hmm. And there is not a trace of autism or sexual desire in this body. No siree.
Yeah.
I've never hurt anyone in my life.
So none of your friend group, sounds like the trans identity didn't stick for anyone. Did anyone like go on and transition, detransition, anything like that? Or okay.
One person who started it all did actually medically transition and detransition.
Okay. Interesting.
This might be getting into too many details that you don't want to share about any one individual, but do you know?
Feel free to ask anyway.
Okay, perfect. Do you know much about their detransition?
I mean, we're very close, so I feel like I should know more, but I do know, I know that it happened, and...
Was it ideological in nature? There are people go through different... a common thing that I've seen is people detransition when they wake up from... When they realize, for whatever reason, that gender ideology is bunk, basically. When they realize that humans can't meaningfully change sex, when they realize that, we're talking about like a gendered soul, this like ineffable thing that no one can really prove. And so that realization seems to be strong enough for a certain population of people to choose to detransition. Other people detransition, like a lot of trans people like to say, well, most people detransition because of social pressures. Their family really didn't accept them as trans, or it was too the financial burden of keeping up with their transition. Like, do you know kind of where your friend falls on that spectrum of detransition experience?
I do believe that ideological reasons kicked off the detransition. It was like, it was one of those traumatic loss of belief, kind of. You know how it can be very painful to lose your your religion, really.
Totally.
Yeah.
I've been there. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
It's destabilizing. The
Oh,
ground
yes.
is moving from under you, especially if
You feel like you know nothing in it, and the world is so scary and unknown.
Yes, and then especially if you've given a lot of your time and maybe your body, right? I know people are a little dramatic when they talk about it that way, like you've sacrificed your body for this religion. You did it for yourself, even if you were naive and when you were doing it. But yeah, it's much harder when you've invested time and maybe your body into something like this. Yeah.
Especially if you have some really bad effect like osteoporosis.
Yeah. Yeah.
Changing your beliefs doesn't always feel that way. Like, if you're losing your whole worldview and you suddenly realize that you don't know anything and all you knew was a lie and you have nothing, you have no new worldview waiting in the wings to replace it, that's horrifying. But if there's if there is some aspect of your worldview that is conflicting with what you observe around you, then being able to finally let that go is like a weight off your shoulders, because you can finally stop doing all those mental gymnastics to justify it and be like, this thing is simply wrong. And then your world makes more sense, not less. And that actually feels like a breath of fresh air. If like the other one is like waking up really groggy from a surgery, then that is like waking up like normally refreshed after a good night's sleep. So there's different kinds, you know. And I honestly think that having like a really strongly entrenched wrong belief it's like thinking with training weights on. If you are prone to thinking a lot, if you're a smart person but you have a very strongly held incorrect conviction that conflicts with the things that you observe about the world and what makes sense, then you're thinking with training weights on, and when you finally get to let go of that, it's like you're taking the training weights off. So in a way, that there's a benefit to holding those false convictions for a while, as long as you don't hold them forever.
It strengthens you. Yeah, I found that for me personally, like the first time that you realize that something that you really believe in is wrong, or especially if it's like a kind of a whole set of beliefs or like some type of affiliation, especially when it comes to like political ideologies, that was very, very destabilizing, very like upsetting. And then it can become like a fun thing. Like then suddenly when I encounter a challenge to something that I believed, but I'm not even sure how deeply I believed it, right? I just kind of absorbed it as a belief. Then it can become like a fun thing. Like, oh, okay. I never even listened to what the other people say about this. Like, what was right? Who knows? I've been wrong before. I could totally be wrong. And then it becomes kind of like a fun thing to when you're actually open to changing your mind, right?
Yeah,
it
stay open.
Cool. Yeah.
Never have principles.
That's not what I said. But yeah. be open. Yeah. Okay, what else? I know I took us in a few directions. Where were we? Or where did we want
I don't know where we were.
Talking about like at what age and at what stage in trans identification or not, and like things like getting like the smutty stuff into the fandom, and like what is this like, how is this associated with your guys' trans identification and maybe coming out of the trans identification, etc.? Because it seems like the whole fandom was completely interwoven with the trans identifications. I find that very, very interesting that you guys happen to be in an all girls high school, so there were no actual males to confront
burst your bubble.
Yeah, because like obviously these online Tumblr fandoms are just girls. There's no boys in them. They're just girls. But at least then the girls go and interact with real life males of their own age.
But we had no real life males to show us up.
Right.
Huh. Yeah. Okay, so
how did it play out?
Well, I wish I had gathered more data at the time, but it was very hard to do that because I obviously couldn't ask them about autoandrophilia in so many words. And so, I mean, just the fact that I was aware that AGP and AAP existed meant that I was already on a very different path from them.
Mhm.
And like I was like I've said this to Phil before on that interview. I was doing this planned obsolescence thing with my transition where I was only doing the things that could be easily reversed.
Mhm.
So I was like, basically that just meant buying clothes from the men's section at Kmart. That's all I was doing. It's so like small. Like I tried to think of like a male name for myself too, but like there was little way that I could do that other than clothes shopping. But what was I saying? Oh yeah. Also, I count social transition among the things that are less reversible than you think, but that's a whole other discussion. But as for them, they didn't talk about like, well, they never came straight out and said, when I wear a packer, it turns me on. And they weren't binary trans guys also. Like that one person, like they weren't binary trans guys. There was one binary trans guy who was very much I am a boy, like I am male, but the others were all non-binary of some description. That one, the one who's like I'm a boy, like kind of later confessed to me about secretly taking on some more true scummy sort of, if not thoughts, then at least feelings during that time. It was like, hey, wait a second. These people are not as trans as I am. They're not as dysphoric as I am. They don't care about crossing over. They just, it's not about becoming like the opposite sex. It's about differentiating themselves from our sex. And yeah, that it was. I mean, none of us could have ever been mistaken for a real binary cis male ever. But it was obvious for them that like it was an identity thing. Like teenagers are always doing that constant overhaul. Every few days or weeks. It's no wonder so many of them nowadays have DID or think they do. I mean,
right, and this is another thing why I'm wondering why you think it's AAP when it just seems like to be the whole like trans, social thing where it's necessary to not be cis.
well, maybe it's not. Maybe I just can't understand like the ways that they could be internally different. Maybe I don't have theory of mind. Maybe I'm just fucking autistic. But I just it was a feeling I got from the fact that on the surface they were doing the same things that I wanted to do, like considering HRT and cutting their hair short, and like thinking about gender, and fawning over anime boys. I don't
And I
know.
guess this is
I just I do wonder if AAP is contagious or like just a little bit like there's a little bit of AAP that you catch in proximity to the real thing, the real strong thing, and that plus the social pressure to like be trans if all your friends are and to fit in that way, it snowballs. Like there's a little kernel in the middle of it, and that just collects all that snow. I don't know. There's no snow where I live, but the snowball.
yeah. Yeah, I think there's some truth like that. Just like how we accept that AGP is on a spectrum, I of course AAP is also going to be on a spectrum. But I just do think, and I know Tali, you might disagree here because of the whole, not thinking that straight girls are going to be into like the gay fan fiction thing. But I think some are, and I think it is kind of becomes sort of, maybe there's a chicken and the egg thing going on here where it's like, when you're first encountering ideas of sexuality and it's present, this is a young teenage girl who, might not have like the kind of stronger sexualities that you guys both described in the previous episode, but like more like the kind of like slow sexual development that I had as a teenager, where like if this is the kind of media that you're being introduced to and this is like your only context of what sex is and what romance is, it just makes sense to me that that's going to become like what you find sexy and how you associate sex as being with these like the two anime boys or whatever. But yes, it also makes sense that it's probably the AAPs who are writing this content, who are creating it. But I think a lot of the ones like kind of absorbing it are probably would be more likely. Like I think what Ashley, you're describing your friends, it sounds more like pretty much kind of basic ROGD is what's being described here. And I think those girls are going to absorb that content. It's, cute boys who are much more accessible. They're not at all intimidating like actual boys, and they're not gross, and they're written by girls. And so
I don't even know how sexual it is. So like, I kind of agree. I'm inclined to agree. I do think that what Ashley's describing, it sounds like prototypical ROGD. Like Lisa Lippman.
Yeah, we definitely fit the ROGD description.
Yeah, like she could have been talking about your class in school, right? This cluster here. And I'm wondering, I'm less inclined to believe that these girls, these non-AAP girls are seeing this men loving men stuff and that's sort of becoming their sexuality because it's their first. I'm more inclined to say like they're just not seeing it very sexually, and it is sort of just something to do. Like this is what your friends do, whether that's your real life friends or your internet friends, is what people read. And it could be interesting enough, like especially if you're into the fandom that they're writing about. So I could see it just being sort of more entertainment and less sexually arousing. And then maybe that's how we do know the AAP versus ROGD is the people for whom it is sort of sexually arousing, and that it develops into more of an autohomoerotic experience. Like we know some detransitioners, I think like Helena included, right? Who like they were into this sort of stuff because this was socially what the groups of FTMs and stuff that they were hanging out with were doing. And then they also kind of had this sexual affinity for gay men. And so I'm wondering if the people for whom that develops, if that would be one indicator that you're more likely looking at autoandrophilia and less likely looking at ROGD. But I don't know.
I don't know either. And all this not knowing and saying, well, I think this, but I can't be sure what. Well, I think this, but I can't be sure. It's making me like regret coming on here without first doing some kind of solid research, without bringing some data. I came here with nothing, no notes, no actual evidence, nothing solid. I'm just waffling. Sorry,
it doesn't
everyone.
Exist much. It doesn't really exist.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a problem.
And true, we could all do it, and we Aaron and I have gotten that pushback. Yeah, we've been told kind of like shut up and do some research, and like fair. Aaron and I are, we have full-time jobs, so that makes it a little harder. We can show up for an hour or two a week to do a podcast, right, and talk with people who also think about these things. So please don't beat yourself up for not coming with data collected. But
I don't have a full-time job though. I have more free time than you two. Like
no
it's not
excuse.
like my day
No
is completely
excuse.
empty, but I could. What? What'd you say?
He said that you have no excuse.
Yeah, I don't.
Just kidding.
Yeah, no. It is a really interesting question. Again, I'm not convinced that a quote unquote normal straight girl is going to like find this very erotic and be able to self-insert as the more feminine man. But I could see people just enjoying this as entertainment, especially if it's socially rewarded. This is what my friends are into too. This is what I can talk about with them. Especially like socially anxious kids. It's like they don't really know how to this is something we can talk about. Everyone's enjoying the same thing, and it is really a community, right? These fandoms are communities, which is another interesting aspect too, right? It's not like people who write, for example, like erotica novels and stuff where people are kind of independently consuming them. The consumption of this type of stuff is very community oriented. It's just an iterative process, right? From what I understand, people are adding to each other's stories and talking about each other's stories. So it seems very like inherently social.
Yeah, social incentives are extremely powerful. Really makes me wonder if there could possibly be some way for the, erotic target identity inversion to be socially transmitted.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. No, I don't think so.
No, haven't fleshed it out too much. That's fine. That's fine.
My apprehension to that is that I'm just like not inclined to believe that you can catch autogynephilia or autoandrophilia. It's
Yeah,
to
me
me it
neither.
feels right. It feels more likely to be a predisposition that can get scratched to
Mhm.
different degrees depending on your environment. But well, when you have more thoughts about that, let us know.
I mean, you can milk it though. You can really cultivate it. You can take that little
Right.
AGP seed and nurture it until it grows into a big strong tree. Like Finster. Finster got paid to transition essentially.
That's a whole other topic.
Okay,
We could
that's
go
simplifying it a
down. Yeah,
lot.
that's some
That's
serious pink
simplifying it a
pilling
lot, but you
content.
get what I mean, right? The social and financial incentives to feminize himself
Yes.
more and more, and he cross-dressed and stuff. And when that was like, normalized and it wasn't a big deal for him to cross-dress anymore. He started taking hormones. I'm not saying he was consciously doing it for the love or the money, but
You can't
would he have
ignore
been
the
doing it without
incentives.
those things?
Right. But I think you make the point that the seed was there.
Yeah, the seed.
I think we're at an hour here, so I want to kind of stay on time this time. But before we wrap up, I did want to talk about something we kind of alluded to. And Ashley, I'm not sure if you know much about this, but you brought it up at the beginning, Tali, is that a lot of the people who are writing this content are actually lesbians.
Or calling
Self-identified
themselves
lesbians.
right.
Yeah. Like I actually know in mutuals with a radical feminist lesbian identified individual who writes this material, and she says it's very popular amongst lesbians. And when I ask why, the answer is that like basically that there's no like erotica content that's for lesbians. It's always about men. And I was like, well, this is your opportunity.
Make it.
Right. You're creating this from scratch. Like make the content that you want. And I never get a really satisfactory answer to why they aren't doing that. They just keep making the gay content. And I have no explanation for that except autoandrophilia.
I also have absolutely no idea why that's going on. I mean, I wish I did. I think back to like what I said earlier about like male characters written by women being like the true expression of who a woman really is, and that freedom to be masculine. And it could be like, a butch for butch thing. You just imagine that they're both butch lesbians if that's your if that's what you're into. But writing them deliberately as women might, I don't know, mess things up somehow. I don't know, internalized misogyny, self-consciousness. But I really don't get. You're right. It's weird that lesbians are so into this. This is like way out of anything that I understand.
Butch for butch, we think that's autoandrophilia. We'll just put that
Yeah.
out there. I'm not going to say 100% of the time, but it's yeah, in the same way that like gay males are attracted to like masculinity, theoretically a homosexual female is attracted to femininity. So the butch for butch thing we think might be better explained by autoandrophilia.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Yeah,
the misogyny, like this idea that like you can only truly express, like women can only sort of be the truest expression of like the female desire would be writing in these male characters. I don't see a radical feminist saying that. That's pretty anti-feminist, right? To say that like women can only be free, that women can only be free if they're played through men or something. Like that should be in opposition.
Women can feel that way, can have that feeling somewhere down inside that makes them want to write male characters.
Wouldn't a radical feminist politically be opposed? Like, wouldn't that be something that a radical feminist would fight? in theory, let's say you're right, that this is some like deep down thing that a lot of females experience. Wouldn't a radical feminist be saying like, I'm going to challenge this because women should be able to explore their sexuality without the framing of the male gate? Like, it feels like that would be something that you wouldn't just accept and
but that
promote.
doesn't mean we are.
I'm not even saying we should. I don't think it's misogynist. I don't really believe. I'm not gonna say I don't believe in misogyny. Misogyny exists. I'm not a feminist. I came to that. I realized this about myself after believing that I was for most of my life. And even when I first got into the gender discourse, the radical feminism stuff appealed to me because it felt like a way to like still be progressive and challenge this stuff. Like if you're doing it in defense of women or something, that it was like had more validity.
You don't have to do it in defense of women. You can just do it in defense of the truth.
I agree, and that's where I got to for sure, and especially when I realized how sort of identitarian the radical feminism stuff is. But yeah, I don't know. It's not compelling to me, at least from what I understand of the radical feminist mindset and ideology. It would seem like that would be an opportunity to challenge that. If it truly is innate in these women, right, that they're compelled to draw love interest in these male forms because it's like safer that way, I would think a radical feminist would choose to challenge that, not continue to write male on male.
Right, put more content out in the world that you're lamenting is the only content that's out in the world.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And also, this does exist. Lesbian content and and the AGPs are making it, so it does exist. And the lesbians could consume it. They don't.
I mean,
really.
I don't know. Would lesbians want to read or watch or consume lesbian content made by AGPs? I'm not saying they wouldn't. I'm genuinely asking.
Well, I don't know, but like this idea, like there's the yaoi culture and then there's yuri culture, which is, from my limited understanding, that's like, well, I guess it's a little more complicated, yuri specifically, but this does exist. These like women on women Japanese comics, that content exists. If that's what lesbians wanted, it doesn't.
Right.
I don't know. I have my biases too, and I think in some ways I probably need to open my mind up, because I think I've come to a bit of an infallible point where like I think that any lesbians who are reading the yuri stuff are autogynephiles. Like, to me, it's like, oh well, then you're not even a lesbian if you're into this. So I probably am not being. I'm not allowing for enough nuance here, but. The production, at least, of this content doesn't make sense to me in the absence of autogynephilia and autoandrophilia.
I'm not going to argue too much with that. Yeah.
Wow, I'm right.
I think I think the consumption of it is not necessarily explained by those things, but yeah, I think the production is probably predominantly, those.
Not to like create argument again, but I don't know if you can necessarily draw such a line between production and consumption. I mean, Aaron, you were saying that, like, the people creating gay content are surely AAP, but the people producing it don't have to be. But like, surely if you consume enough of it, like it spills over into what you produce. Like, if you consume enough of it, you're compelled to produce it. It's like it's that irresistible urge to reflect back onto people what they have put onto you, the social thing. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know what I'm talking
and
about.
like, as well, essentially, like to contribute to the conversation. Essentially, like Tali was
it's social motivation.
Yeah. Like, it's like the conversation that's being had essentially. No disagreement there. Any last thoughts?
Cool beans. Last thoughts. My last thought is that I should actually research this stuff, these questions, like, I don't know, how AAP are straight women, why do lesbians like yaoi, because evidence is required.
Write a book.
A book. Maybe.
Yeah.
About
I mean,
what?
if you collect any data, we would love to talk about it with you.
All right. Sweet.
Cool.
Thanks, Ashley.
All right.
Thanks for coming back.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.